The May 21st, 2020 meeting of the Woodbridge Township Board of Education, please come to order. Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson? Ms. Anderson? Ms. Bourdin?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Sedana?
Here.
Mr. Tamburello?
Here.
Mr. Triebwasser?
Here.
Mr. Velez?
Here.
And Mr. Dellapetro?
Here. Okay. Okay, Mr. Secretary, as required by the Sunshine Law, please read the notice of meetings.
Thank you, Mr. President. The New Jersey Open Public Meetings Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend the meetings of public bodies at which any business affecting their interest is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with the provisions of this act, the Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be published by having the date, time, and place thereof posted as follows. January 29, 2020 and May 11th, 2020. Emailed to the Home News Tribune, the Star Ledger, and the Municipal Clerk's Office, posted in Avenel Middle School and the Board of Education Administration Building, also published on the school district website.
Okay. Ms. Anderson, please read the closed session statement.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to motion for the approval of the following closed session statement. In compliance with the Sunshine Law, the board must go into closed session in order to discuss subject exempted from the public portion of our meeting.
I lost the audio. Okay, I have a motion by Ms. Anderson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Mr. Harris. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carried.
And just to be clear, because I think Marie's, because the motion trailed off, the audio trailed off. Marie, can you, the reasons we're going into closed session, can you just state that again for the public? You're on mute. Marie, you're on mute. There you are. Got it.
Right.
Yeah, it's for personnel. Your voice trailed off, unfortunately, I think, right? Did everybody have that problem? Okay, I want to make sure it wasn't just me, just for public purposes, Marie. Just
Discussions held in closed session will be regarding personnel matters.
personnel.
Can you hear me?
Yes, that's it. That's it. Just want to make sure. Okay.
Okay. Okay, at this time, we're going to retire to closed session. As soon as we're done, we'll be back. Meeting to order. Please rise for a salute to the flag and a moment of silence.
Pledge allegiance to the flag.
Flag.
United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Have a motion to reconvene.
So motioned.
Motion by Mr. Triebwasser. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Okay, second by Ms. Anderson. I have a motion and second by Ms. Anderson. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Here.
Ms. Bourdin?
Here.
Mr. Harris?
Here.
Mr. Sedana?
Here.
Mr. Tamburello?
Here.
Mr. Triebwasser?
Here.
Mr. Velez?
Here.
And Mr. Dellapetro?
Here. Okay, will someone make a motion to approve the minutes of our previous meeting?
So motion.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Harris. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, second, Mr. Sedana. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, I have a motion by Mr. Harris, seconded by Mr. Sedana. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Mr. Secretary, please state for the record any notices of bids received by the board.
Thank you, Mr. President. On May 14th, 2020, we received Brett Sumgen bid project HVAC for Woodbridge High School. Also on May 14th, 2020, we received a Brett Sumgen bid project for electrical upgrades at various locations.
Okay, to facilitate the flow of this virtual meeting, all questions and comments from the public will be addressed after the presentations of all agendas. Dr. Zega, please state for the record the superintendent's reports for the month of April 2020.
Mr. President, I have the following reports to present to the board. The student register and fire drill reports, the suspension reports for elementary and secondary schools, and bomb threat reports.
Okay, superintendent's agenda. Dr. Zega, do you have any recommendations?
Mr. President, I have 8 items to present to the board.
Okay, do I have a motion for the superintendent's agenda?
So motioned.
I have a motion by Mr. Triebwasser. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Anderson. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Seeing none, roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Ms. Bourdin, Ms. Bourdin. Come back to Ms. Bourdin. Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Sedana,
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello,
Yes.
Mr. Triebwasser,
Yes.
Mr. Velez,
Yes.
Ms. Bourdin.
Yes.
We didn't hear you the first time. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
And Mr. Della Pietro.
Yes. Policy and planning, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Policy and Planning Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, presents the following 10 items. I move for the adoption of the foregoing.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Harris. Do I have a second?
Second.
Who was that? Who seconded that motion?
Velez.
Oh, Joe. Okay, thank you, Joe. Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Harris, seconded by Mr. Velez. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Ms. Bourdin,
Yes.
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Sedana,
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello,
Yes.
Mr. Triebwasser, Mr. Triebwasser,
Yes.
Mr. Velez,
Yes.
and Mr. Della Pietro.
Yes. Curriculum, Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Curriculum Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, presents the following 8 items. I move for the adoption of the foregoing.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Harris. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Mr. Sedana. I have a motion by Mr. Harris, seconded by Mr. Sedana. Are any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Ms. Bourdin,
Yes.
Mr. Harris,
Yes.
Mr. Sedana,
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello,
Yes.
Mr. Triebwasser,
Yes.
Mr. Velez,
Yes.
Mr. Della Pietro.
Yes. Okay, prior to presenting the finance agenda for the board vote, we will conduct a hearing regarding the bond ordinance and refunding represented in item number 19 of the finance agenda. The board is proposing to refinance bonds at a lower interest rate to produce tax savings. The bonds will be paid off in accordance with the original term and not extended. Mary Lyons of Phoenix Advisors is with us tonight to answer any of our questions. We will now open the floor to the board and the public for comments or questions. If any member of the public would like to comment regarding this particular item, please call either 732-602-8472 or 732-602-8550 at this time. You will be asked to provide your name, section of the township in which you reside. We ask that you limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes in accordance with Regulation 1100D. Are there any comments or questions from the board? Okay. I guess we can go to the presentation.
Ms. Delapietro, we're just waiting to see if anybody calls in with any questions.
Okay,
From the public.
got it.
Just give it a little, yeah, give
To
it
the
a,
board president,
Yeah, Mr. Tamburello.
if I may, should the agenda be spoken first prior to the presentation? Because we didn't present the agenda.
Mr. Tamburello, we need to do it in this order where we present this, have a comment, and then we'll get to the agenda after that.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
a little different than what we normally do, Ezio, in view of the Zoom aspect of this meeting, the virtual aspect of this meeting.
Thank you for the clarification.
Dr. Z, you've got someone there answering the phones?
Through the chair, yes, Mr. Busch, the lines are open.
Okay. So Frank, how long would you like, Mr. President, to give this period? I mean, this is live, so people know they could call in. And if,
You're asking me how long?
yeah, I mean, I think you're good now, but if you wait as long as you feel necessary.
I'll give him another minute, and then if no one calls, then we'll move on.
Yep, that's fine.
Nothing yet, Doc?
No, Mr. President, at this point, there's no one on hold and no calls.
Okay. All right, I guess we'll close this this session. If no one's calling in, we'll move on. Is there anything for Miss Lyons before she goes? No? Okay. Thank you, Miss Lyons.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, we'll now close the public hearing on the bond ordinance and funding. Okay, moving on to finance and insurance, Mr. Tamburello.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Finance and Insurance Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Business Administrator Board Secretary, presents the following 19 items. This evening, I move for the adoption of the foregoing 19 items.
Thank you, Mr. Tamburello. I have a motion by Mr. Tamburello. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second. Or the second. I didn't get the second. Someone want to second the motion?
I'll second it.
Jonathan?
Second.
Okay. Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Tamburello, seconded by Mr. Triebwasser. Any comments or questions from the board?
For the Board President,
Yeah, Mr. Tamburello.
a couple items I want to emphasize on my agenda this evening, our agenda this evening. First, item number 8 is the new medical updates for this year for our staff. This is a subject that is very near and dear to Mr. Harris's heart, was the extension of the enrollment deadlines. It's a pretty significant decision that we're asking our people to make. And up until now, we've had a very condensed period of time. I want to thank the business office and again, Mr. Harris for pushing us this week, extending that. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Wolferman or Dr. Zega. Our folks now, our enrollment period, can we lock that in and let everybody know that we have an extended time period to make this decision and what those dates actually are?
Mr. Tamburello, I can check to see the exact dates if you give me a few seconds. I know we did extend those.
I believe May 11th to June 19th.
Yeah, that sounds about right. It's an extended period, and should for some reason someone come in to change their items late, that would be accepted as well. Even if they do pass the deadline, we would make those exceptions. So everybody would get to make that choice and not have to worry that they missed a date.
I think it's important. You got 5 weeks now. Everybody can really focus, compare plans, and pick what's best for them and their family. So I appreciate that extension on the enrollment period. The next item I want to talk about is we had our bond counsel on earlier. With regards to number 19, we are, as a district, taking advantage of some favorable rates that's in the marketplace now to refi. They're calling it refund the debt, but if anybody sees the agenda item, it's a refi. And basically what this does to us, and it's again being proactive, that's our our leadership team at School Street and our business office. Certainly makes sense now. Let's take advantage of these low rates. Let's try to refinance some of the debt. And if what we've discussed is $22 million in debt, getting that at a lower rate, and with the potential savings annually of $75,000 a year in principal and interest payments over the term of the bond debt, I believe from the 2004 referendum. I think it's a good move on our part. We don't have to do it unless rates are in our favor, but putting this on the agenda this evening, approving it, allows us to pull the trigger when we have a 3% or more savings overall with again, a significant dollar amount, $22 million. It equals or could equal $75,000 a year over the term of this note. It could mean upwards of $680,000 in savings. This agenda item allows us to, again, pull that trigger when rates are favorable to us, which, we're getting very close now. And that's why I'm glad that we're being proactive in this. So I'm sure my fellow board members will support this. And I just want to, thank the business office and Dr. Zega and his team for getting on this quickly. And let's strike while the iron is hot. Rates are low. Let's refund some debt and let's save some money. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Tamburello. Any other questions or comments from the board?
Mr. President? Hi, Dan.
Okay. I'm looking for you. Okay.
I wanted to mention to the public that the Federal CARES Act, that was the major federal stimulus law that was passed and signed into law in late March. Woodbridge Township was recently notified that we are eligible for $1.4 million to go towards different funding initiatives in response to the coronavirus. So, the administration is looking at the terms of that money, and probably next month, I would assume, or later this summer, we'll be putting in for that money and taking access to it. So your federal dollars are coming home, and we're very pleased that the state of New Jersey has finally delivered on that money. So we're looking forward to it.
Very good. Good news. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Harris. Are there any further comments or questions from the board? Okay, seeing none, roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdin?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Triebwasser?
Yes.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
And Mr. Delapietro?
Yes. Buildings and grounds, Mr. Harris.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. The Buildings and Grounds Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and Business Administrator, presents the following two items. I move for the adoption of the foregoing.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Harris. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, so seconded by Mr. Tamburello. I have a motion by Mr. Harris, seconded by Mr. Tamburello. Do I have any questions or comments from the board?
Mr. Delapietro?
Mr. Harris?
No, just two. I think you leapfrogged athletics. Just wanted to throw that one out there. But
yes, I did.
Okay, all right. Just want to make sure. And nextly, I want to highlight just item number one for those Woodbridge High School students, future as well as past. The boiler system over at that school has long been a headache for us. the administration and the Buildings and Grounds Committee spends tens of thousands of dollars a year in maintaining an aging HVAC system over there. I want to note for the public that tonight we are awarding a massive renovation project that will be taking place over the next 2 years to replace that boiler system, to not only replace it with a getting rid of the old steam system, but going with hot water heating as well as a centralized air conditioning system. So that will be a comprehensive project that will be up and running for the fall of 2021 if all things go well, which we're planning everything, and that's why it has a 2-year outlook. So I want to give kudos to the business office, Dr. Zega, the Buildings and Grounds Department, as well as the Woodbridge High School administration for finally seeing this project to the finish line. Now the construction begins, I believe, June 15th, the work will begin, and the students, as well as the faculty and staff over there, will be very, very pleased that we finally got this project going. So thank you to my fellow colleagues for getting this done.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Harris. Any questions or comments from the board? Okay, seeing none, roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdin?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Triebwasser?
Yes.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
And Mr. Delapietro?
Yes. Okay, athletics and extracurricular agenda, Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Athletics and Extracurricular Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction, presents the following 22 items. I move for the adoption of the foregoing.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. I have a motion by Ms. Anderson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, seconded by Mr. Triebwasser. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Okay, seeing none. Roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdin?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Triebwasser?
Yes.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes. Okay, transportation, Mr. Velez.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Transportation Committee, on the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Business Administrator Board Secretary, present the following 39 items. I recommend the adoption of the foregoing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Velez. I have a motion by Mr. Velez. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Ms. Bourdin. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Okay, seeing none, roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdin?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Triebwasser?
Yes.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
And Mr. Delapietro?
Yes. Okay, personnel agenda, Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Personnel Committee, on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools and the Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, presents the following 23 items. I move for the adoption of the foregoing.
Okay, I have a motion by Ms. Anderson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, by Mr. Tamburello. Any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Bourdin?
Yes.
Mr. Harris?
Yes.
Mr. Sedana?
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello?
Yes.
Mr. Triebwasser?
I abstain on the name Michael Henderson in item 8 and the name Valerie Henderson in the item 14 and item 18. Yes on all other items.
Mr. Velez?
Yes.
Mr. Delapietro?
Yes. Okay, the negotiations agenda, Mr. Velez.
Thank you, Mr. President. The negotiations The Board of Education Negotiations Committee, along with the Superintendent of Schools, present the following one item, and I move for the adoption of the foregoing.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Velez. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Ms. Anderson. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Okay, seeing none, roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Ms. Bourdin,
Yes.
Mr. Harris,
Abstain?
Mr. Molnar. Excuse me, Mr. Sedana,
Yes.
Mr. Tamburello,
Yes.
Mr. Triebwasser,
I abstain.
Mr. Velez,
Yes.
and Mr. Delapietro.
I'll be abstaining.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Busch, do you have any recommendations? Nothing? Can't hear you. I think you're muted.
None at this time, sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. Okay, is there any old business that should be brought to the attention of the board? Nothing? Okay. Is there any new business that should be brought to the attention of the board?
Mr. Delapietro?
Mr. Harris?
Hi, good evening. I wanted to just give one shout out tonight. It's on an important subject nationally. It's the U.S. Census for 2020. It has to be conducted every 10 years. We're currently going through that right now, and with the coronavirus, it's impacting the count. Woodbridge, we're well ahead of the county. Where most towns in Essex County, we have a 66% response rate so far. That's good, but it's not where it needs to be. 100% is always the goal. So I wanted to put in a plug for the importance of the census this evening. For those of you who have not yet completed the census, you should have received something in the mail. You may have misplaced it or it's buried somewhere by now. So you can simply go on the website, punch in your home address, and you'll be able to complete the census. It takes between 8 and 10 minutes. That website is www.2020census.gov. That's 2020 census, CENSUS.gov. The census helps the state and federal government allocate money. And, that's something that Woodbridge Township is always looking for. To fund programs that are important to us, as well as bring in revenue from our proportional share from the state and federal government. That money oftentimes gets misplaced. It's categorized broadly, goes to children, goes to schools, goes to transportation. I'll give you some real highlights here of how that money is, how the census data helps determine money for federal programs and state programs that we've long come to become accustomed to. That's the Children's Health Insurance Program. That's special education grants, the National School and breakfast and lunch program, foster care programs, as well as child care programs. So if those are services and programs that are important to you and your family, completing the census is a great way to help and the Woodbridge Township School District out. So I encourage everyone to complete the census. You have a few more months. I don't know exactly when it officially ends, but please get on that and help the Woodbridge Township response rate get higher from 66% to hopefully that 100% mark. So thank you for your time and attention this evening. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Anyone else? Okay, there's just one real quick one. On behalf of all the Woodbridge Township Emergency Services, the fire and the EMS departments, I'd like to thank the following schools. They donated $500 gift cards to each emergency services organization at different restaurants throughout the town. I'd like to recognize the schools at John F. Kennedy High School, Island Middle School, School 18, School 26, and School 29. Again, they donated the gift cards. It was greatly appreciated by all the township departments, especially the department that I work for the Forest Fire Department. So again, all those schools that gave the gift cards, from the bottom of our hearts, was greatly appreciated. And thank you very much.
Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. Zega, Dr. Zega.
If I could have a second.
Yes.
I just wanted to update the public as far as our high school graduation ceremonies. We have been updating them as we hear more directives from the state government. Right now, our 3 high school ceremonies are set for drive-in style ceremonies at the Woodbridge Center Mall. This is, right now, this is the most that we're allowed to do as per the state regulations. There was some talk as from the state as far as modifying those regulations to allow a more personal face-to-face ceremony with the students. If that does happen, we will let everyone know and update the public as soon as possible. I know everyone would prefer to be on the football field with all their classmates, and if that's what we're allowed to do, we will make that happen. But right now we have to abide by the regulations from the state, but hopefully those will be updated and revised in the very near future. So we'll get that word out. You should have received word from your principals as far as what graduation right now looks like. But like I said, hopefully in the very near future, we will get word from the state that will allow something a little bit more personal. Thank you. And everyone have a great Memorial Day weekend.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Zega. I'd like this, to recognize Dr. Zega and your staff with this graduation. I know it's every day it's ongoing. I know yourself, Dr. Massimino, you and Mr. Small are greatly involved in the logistics of this. So I thank you for doing this. I know this is no easy endeavor. Whatever you guys need, if you need anything, let us know. Whatever support you need. I know it's a big endeavor, but whatever you need, reach out to us, and we're going to give you 100%. And I commend you guys for what you're doing. You're doing an excellent job, as everyone is. So again, whatever you guys need, just let us know. Is there anything else from the board? Any other old business? Okay. Seeing none, in keeping with our past practice, we will open this portion of the meeting for questions and comments from the public. If you wish to say something, please call 732-602-8472 or 732-602-8550. When prompted, please provide your name and section of the township which you reside. Please limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes in accordance with Regulation 1100D. I will not answer any questions until you have completed your 5 minutes to allow you full opportunity to say what you need to say, so as not to interrupt your time. Okay, so at this time, we'll wait for some public discussion. If you want, you can phone in. Anything yet? Not yet? Okay.
Frank, Mr. President,
Yes, Ms. Bourdin.
if I may, I should have said this earlier. I just wanted to point out that we've had two very successful video conferences this week with the CPAG and the administration regarding the summer programs and the Bridge Academy and how they'll relate back to PACE and helping out our kids this summer. And I just want to thank Dr. Zega, Ms. Baer, and Mr. Patton for supporting our parents for some pretty decent sized meetings and answering all the questions as best as possible at that point. And I just want to say that if anybody has any questions, they're more than welcome to reach out to the CPAG. And I know that Ms. Baer and Dr. Zega and Mr. Patton are available. If anybody missed the meetings and they had any questions, they can contact me, or I'm available through the CPAG as well.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Bourdin. Doc, any?
Mr. President, we have a call. We have a call.
Okay, okay.
Okay, caller, you're on.
Hi, this is David Pinkowitz from Island. I have a number of comments and a series of questions that are kind of just interspersed throughout my commentary. First, regarding finance agenda, I just want to agree with the board that it's a good move to potentially refinance the debt, and that it's a great job by the administration and the board. So thank you. Transportation agenda, these are just a couple questions. One, do the routes that are there reflect enough transportation to provide appropriate social distancing? So for example, for moving a football team as an example, that would normally take up an entire bus? Are we taking additional buses to accommodate that? And two, should there be cancellations on any of these routes, for example, if activities get canceled, et cetera, can the district get its money back? So that's it for transportation. Regarding school opening. So we're currently in stage 1 of Governor Murphy's road back plan. The 2 stages that potentially affect in-person learning are stage 2, where there's the potential for some in-person learning with modifications in K through 12. Stage 3, where K through 12 may be operated in person with reduced capacity. And given that we're unlikely to see a vaccine or cure for some time, it seems like most of the year, if not all of the year, these are the rules that are the most likely to be in place. So with our schools so crowded, what kinds of plans are the district reviewing if we go in person with social distancing? And I'm giving examples, not necessarily my recommendation, but like some examples could be go back, but not all the children go back. Some are still online. Or all children have some kind of hybrid of in-person and remote, or that the school finds some extra facilities, whether that be tents or trailers or renting a room elsewhere. And I'm sure there's any number of other ideas you might already have. So just trying to get an idea what the school is thinking about as we move forward into the next school year. Returning to a subject I brought up in the March meeting regarding school trips, I've experienced personally the cancellation of trips that were scheduled have been a challenge getting money fully returned. And so the question I have is, will the board and administration take a stance to refrain from allowing classes or student groups to accept money on deposits for school trips unless there's some degree of certainty that the particular trip can go on safely without cancellation and without the need for social distancing, especially when traveling to a location where there may be crowds? And then my next topic, Summer Bridge program. I had asked this to Mr. Bader. He didn't have a 100% answer on it, so I wanted to ask again in public this time. Will this be a supplemental program, that's available to students but it isn't required, or is there an expectation that there will be requirements to complete activities? And then the final commentary is on the agenda, for this meeting itself. First, thank you for switching the meeting to gallery view for the Zoom meeting so we could see the entire board. I think it was a better experience than switching back and forth between whoever made noise on their mic, on their speaker view. So I definitely think that was an improvement. I did have a question which probably would have to be answered by the attorney. Is there any reason that the entire agenda, including the personnel agenda, could not be loaded to the website prior to the board's online meetings? And I ask that because even when the personnel agenda has been modified prior to an open session vote in the traditional public meetings, the public could always see the entire agenda except for whatever modifications occurred prior to the vote. And then, to highlight why that's a problem, for example, you voted on a negotiations agenda today, but it wasn't really, there was no way for me to assess or anyone to assess what exactly was happening in the negotiations agenda. So I would also appreciate to find out what you were actually approving as well. Right, that was it. Thank you.
Pinklitz?
Yes.
So, Mr. President, if I could just address a couple of the items.
Yeah, Dr. Zega.
Mainly reentry. I'm on the statewide legislative committee that has been in constant discussion for a couple of days now about reentry. There are many different committees talking about reentry. Right now, there are a couple of different models, but most of the models that we look at when they are played out will eventually hit a brick wall. And this is statewide. The different things that we are able to do with the social distance restrictions that are in place as of now, it would be very difficult to have any type of in-person school in September. So we are working around that. We are working with the DOE and following their guidelines, but I can tell you that there are many discussions involving people from all of New Jersey. Stop. involving people throughout all of New Jersey. And really, right now, there are more questions than there are answers. And the consensus would be if there's not a safe way to get our students back into school, then we would probably have to think of another option, including more distance learning. But right now, we are working through every possible scenario of how we can get our kids back into school. But the number one priority is safety. So, like I said, right now, there are more questions than answers as far as a re-entry in September.
Mr. President? Mr. President? Just to talk a little bit about the transportation question that Mr. Pinkowitz had. These are renewals for next year. However, they can be adjusted depending on where we sit at that time. Also to point out that even for this year, even with the laws, we got into a consortium with the other schools in Middlesex County, the other districts in Middlesex County, to renegotiate all our transportation contracts. And it's actually one of the agenda items that is on the transportation agenda. So we are looking at that, we're aware of that, and we're dealing with it.
And Mr. President? Oh, Mr. Bader is probably going to answer the question on the Imagine Learning.
Yep. Thanks, Mr. Harris. Mr. President?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Bader.
Thank you. Mr. Pinkowitz, yes, the expectation is that all students will participate, all current students except for seniors will participate in the Bridge program, with the exception of any student in any honors course in math or language arts who has a summer assignment, that they could focus on that assignment and not participate, because that's above and beyond the Bridge program. But again, and I know we talked a little bit in an email, the Bridge program, not only does it fill in some holes that we know occurred because of lack of live instruction every day, but it also enables students to get enrichment and go farther. So it is uses artificial intelligence to give students the proper rigor to move forward and also reinforce concepts. So the expectation is there will be, everyone will participate.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bader. Okay. Is there any more phone calls, Doc?
No more calls. No more calls.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else from the board? Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So motioned.
Mr. Delapietro. Mr. Delapietro,
I hear you. Go ahead.
the June meeting.
Oh, yes. Before we adjourn, the June meeting, we're going to bump back to June, hang on, to June 9th instead of June 11th. Due to the graduations that we're doing over the course of the 3 nights, one of them falls on our meeting night. So our regular meeting in June will be June 9th instead of the 11th. And that will go out in the public notice also. Okay, at this time, we have a motion on the floor to adjourn made by Mr. Treat.
I'm sorry, Mr. President, we have another caller.
Okay.
Okay, caller, you are on the air.
Hello to Dr. Zega and everybody else on the board. My name is Barbara Ann Raquel, and I'm in Island, New Jersey. I have pre-K. You can't hear me.
We can hear you.
We get our,
Okay.
You have to turn off your sound to the broadcast.
I got it.
There's a
I
delay.
got it. It's off.
Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so my daughter is a pre-K student at Lincrest. I live in Island. My last name is Raquel, Barbara Ann Raquel. The gentleman who called prior brought up a point that I don't think was answered that I think is important. I've been watching the meeting and I don't know what's going on because there's no agenda. There's nothing to look at. So how do I know how to ask questions? I don't understand what's going on. I don't know what you've done in terms of your budget for transportation. I don't know how much of that's set in stone and what if we don't go to school next year? Sports, you have a budget for that. What if we don't go to school next year? I mean, so how do we ask questions if we can't? I've been looking all over the website as you guys have been speaking to try and find anything that can tell me anything about what's been going on. I mean, there's how many amendments have passed? We haven't seen any of them. So there's no real opportunity to ask questions, and I just find that to be unacceptable. I'm not sitting here for no reason. I didn't just send my autistic screaming child upstairs to be watched for no reason. So I would appreciate if the public can get a little bit more information so that if we have questions, we can ask adequate ones and not waste anybody's time. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Dr. Zega?
the agenda is posted on our website under Board of Education under agendas. So
Okay.
all the agendas are on except negotiations and personnel. And they'll be, traditionally, we've always posted negotiations and personnel the day after the meeting.
Right. So it's no different even under the virtual circumstances, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so just to confirm, it is posted on the website. So if anyone goes on the website and looks up, they can find the agendas. Okay, all right, at least we got that cleared up. Okay, at this time I have a motion on the floor to adjourn. I just need a second.
Second.
Mr. Petro?
No.
Sir,
For Harris?
sorry.
Okay.
I just want to address Ms. Rattel just a little further.
Go ahead.
The agenda is on the district website, but it's a page, or it's actually 2 pages away from the home page. So, Mr. Pinkowitz is an astute member of the public in terms of participating in meetings for many years. So a guy like him, he knows where to find it. But Ms. Rattel might be new to the district. I think I heard pre-K students, so she's very new to the district. So perhaps for the next virtual or remote meeting, we can put it on the home page where parents can find where the agendas are, so they don't have to go looking for it. I just wanted to make that plug to Miss Ratella. We apologize for that. We could have been a little more. That could have been placed a little more paramountly for any member of the public to find, whether experienced with board meetings or new for their first time. So I apologize for that. We'll make sure that we correct that for the next meeting. Okay.
Dr. Zega, can you work on that? Maybe if they could put that, if you could maybe have our IT look at that, maybe they could move that, the agenda so that it's easier for the public to find. If they can look at that, if it's possible.
Yes, Mr. President, next meeting, it'll be front and center.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Okay, so I have a motion. I have a second. I need a second. Someone will give me a second.
Second.
Okay, Sue, Ms. Bourdin's a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, ayes have it. Motion carried. Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.